Now, would you be willing to pay more tax for better GP services? Well, public satisfaction with our GP services falls to a record low. A recent attitude survey found that almost half of the public would be willing to contribute more in taxes to go towards funding the NHS.
Well, with us now to debate this is Dr. Anita Raja, who says it would make the system better, and commentator Lewis Oakley, who says it's the fault of the health service for not spending its money wisely. Good morning to both of you. Lewis, let's start off with you in that case. I mean, we know there are so many problems at the moment, aren't there? Satisfaction, as we've seen, is at a record low. What's going to fix the system? Isn't it sort of an extra injection of money that could make the difference here?
No, I really think that, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting a different result. The money we spend on the NHS goes up and up and up, and the moral of the story is sort of the more money you put in, the longer the waiting lists are getting. So it's clearly not about the money that's going in. It is about how that money is being spent. It's about, are people, thinking logically about where resources need to go. I think a big thing that we don't talk about enough in this country is procurement and the amount of money spent on contracts to the NHS from greedy companies that see the NHS as this massive cash cow. All great, we'll make a load of profit off it, rather than thinking about, the actual patients at the end. And, of course, the doctors and GPs and nurses that deserve a good wage for the incredible work that they do. If you were telling me, look, if you pay more in tax, it'll go to, paying better wages and quicker waiting times, that would be a different argument. But what we see is that money is just sucked out. You spend £50,000 on new signs for your local GP and more managers. It's just wasted. So until, that system is corrected and realigned, I don't think we should put more money into it.
Well, the question is, I mean, Dr. Anita Raja, should it come from taxation in any event, given, usually the highest tax burden is on people who need GP services the most, when rich companies, for example, leave their money offshore and other countries don't fund their system purely through taxation and have better outcomes? I'm thinking of France and Germany and other places, in the developed world.
Well, my understanding of it is that it would be a very good idea to be offering more taxes towards GP surgeries, but we need to, the government for once needs to allow GP partners to decide where they spend that money. So there should be a budget that should be allocated to different GP surgeries, and they then need to decide where this money needs to go. I mean, the government comes up with something ridiculous like spending 250 million on new telephone lines that GP services have been using for 6 to 7 years anyway. I mean, it's ridiculous the way the money is being spent. I totally agree. But we need to inject more money, because what we're saying now is that you want the service over 4,000 cc horsepower engine, but you only have fuel to fill a car that has a 600 cc engine. So that's not going to work. At the moment, GPs are having to spend from an ever-shrinking pot, which is inversely proportional to the inflation, and it's becoming impossible to pay rents, bills, to hire more staff, and this is why you're not able to see your GP.
I think what's interesting there is we sort of agree that we don't believe that the money is going to be spent in the right way. But I think the sort of wider point is, look at the British public right now being asked to pay more money again for something. We can't. There is a cost of living crisis. Most people are just being able to afford their bills. And all we're hearing from different companies and different sections of society is, look at the water companies. We say, we've got no money. We've had to dump all of the sewage in the river. Can we have more money? No. The same with the councils. We've got no money. We're bankrupt. Can we have more? No, there is no more. You can't keep coming to the taxpayer and asking for more money when, as we're seeing right here, you can't even guarantee that money is going to be spent in the right places to have the outcomes we want.
And the difficulty, I think, for people is, we're seeing the highest tax burden for many years at the moment. Anyway, just to say, a Treasury spokesperson has said, we are fully committed to an effective NHS backed by record funding of nearly £165 billion a year by the end of this Parliament. I mean, Dr. Anita, when we talk about injecting some extra money, how would that work, bearing in mind the tax burden on people at the moment? Would it be an extra charge for everybody? Would it be an extra charge for those people who use it most? Would it be an extra charge for the highest earners? The sort of how you get this system to work would be a tricky one, wouldn't it?
No, it's a fantastic question, and I have a very good answer for it. I mean, when you come to look at people who are paying tax towards GP services, it should be people, I'm not an economist, and of course I cannot put down a figure, but it should be something sensible. For instance, a household or, you know, a person who has an income of more than, say, £90,000 per annum, or a household that has an income, a combined income of more than £90,000 per annum, there should be a threshold so that the burden is not on people who are not high earners. It should essentially be falling on people who are high earners so that they can help the rest of the public. And this is exactly what we would expect. But unfortunately, what we have seen is that money, you know, like for instance, when it comes to the healthcare services, there's an imposition of things that are not required. And I agree that money is spent on things that are absolutely ridiculous and not needed. So what I would suggest is that if there is a tax that we impose on people, it should be on people that have a good income. And of course, the government needs to sit and decide what a good income would be, but it certainly should be, you know, more than £90,000 per annum household income. And also, the GP partners should decide where the money is spent.
Yeah. You know, Lewis, the nation takes incredible pride in the NHS being free. It's sort of something akin to a shared national religion. That's sort of part of the problem in trying to change the various ways in which it's funded. You know, it's a sacred cow. What you're saying, and I think it's important for people to hear, is that that management make a huge amount of money, and the money's being inadequately directed. Most people cannot get an appointment at a GP surgery, and the consequence means that, amongst other things, cancer survival rates, for example, compared to Germany and France and even Ireland, are worse in this country than they are in those parts of the world.
Yeah, I mean, look, our family, you know, one of our children has used the NHS a lot, so I'm incredibly grateful for what they've done. But I think if you're losing the support of people like me that's saying, oh, actually, you know, I've seen the NHS at its best and its worst, and I really don't think more money is going to help the situation here, because I've seen where those kind of breakdowns happen of, you know, things being cancelled last minute and, you know, what the medication cost. I just think the British public do see it as this golden goose, and it should be. It's something we should be immensely proud of. But unfortunately, and it's out of our hands as well, the way it is being run, you know, it's not fit for purpose in its current form.
OK, well, Dr Anita, I mean, you know, from that point of view, it does change the whole ethos, doesn't it, of the NHS? I know, you know, some services people do pay extra for at the moment anyway, but to then start charging people, and if you go to the higher earners and take that extra money, because you've both been talking about how the system works, the procurement, the money that just gets used up in the system without actually being targeted in the right way, isn't that money going to end up going the same way unless there's a complete overhaul of how it's managed?
Look, we've got to take back control of how the system is run. And we're unable to do that without putting in more money. We have now established that the government is not interested in paying the doctors, they're not interested in paying the nurses, they're not interested in running the NHS the way it should be run. They hardly ask any stakeholders where the money should be spent. They impose contracts on different services, and that's silly. I think we need to understand that if we want to save the system, if you want your GP practice to run for the next 50 years, for instance, then you do need to pump in more money. Yes, we need to be sure that the money goes in the right place and is spent in the right way. But if we're expecting GP times to go down, that's just not going to happen, because nobody's going to take those jobs. Did you know that if you look at the numbers right now,
you know, Dr. Anita Raja, the government are negotiating with junior doctors over pay. One of the challenges is to get people to become GPs in the first place. You know, some people would argue that GP practitioners, especially where they run those businesses in a business fashion, make a fairly decent salary and should be open on Saturdays. And it's almost impossible, especially in underprivileged areas, to get access to those appointments. But the government's point is they are throwing money at the problem, which is precisely the opposite of what you're saying. What's being said here by Lewis Oakley is that it's not being directed in the right way.
No, I totally disagree. Please don't we need to be very sure about what we're saying here. We don't need to mislead the public by telling them that the government is in negotiation and is trying to help. We know what the government has done to the NHS. Austerity, years and years of pay cuts, 30% less than what it was 10 years ago. We are going inversely proportional to inflation, and we've got to admit that. Do you think it is fair for GP contracts to be shrinking with the ongoing inflation and expecting them to be running 7 days a week? Well, let me tell you, the GP practice that I work at does work 7 days a week, and GPs do actually work from 8 to 8, 8 a.m. to 8 p.m., 12 hours a day. But there's simply not enough of us. In the history of the NHS, for the first time, we're having the largest amounts of exodus of young GPs who are under the age of 35, leaving the profession for better opportunity abroad.
Anita Raja,
why is that
I hear what you're saying. I'm not talking over you. I hear your passion, and there'll be a lot of people across the country listening to you and probably, alongside you, to say the very least. But the reality is that I think we all agree on this panel that there are less GPs. There has to be a solution, because most people of privilege, me and others, can simply bypass the NHS and get access to a GP, whereas those who are most in need can't. And the consequences of that are, well, horrifying and, on any view, frankly, an embarrassment, it seems to me. But
there you are. Back to the same thing.
I'm afraid we have to stop it there.
Okay.
But no doubt, carry on sending your tweets. Do get in touch with the show.
But Lewis Oakley, Dr. Anita Raja, thank you both very much for your contributions this morning. And there are so many people getting in touch, actually. Yeah. A lot of views. Tracy, absolutely not. People pay enough in tax to see their GP. For the past 4 years, it's been impossible. But Christopher says, yes, I would pay more tax for a better NHS or pay towards a GP or an A&E visit. So thank you very much for all of those.